Detective Shaman Winslow's phone rang at exactly 4:32 a.m. He slept lightly, as he had for the past 20 years of his career, so he answered on the first ring. "Winslow," he said hoarsely, fighting the urge to clear his throat. "Detective, this is Dispatcher Ramirez. We've received a call from Wichita, Kansas. A young woman's body has been found at the Sleepy Moon Motel, multiple stab wounds. The ID is in the name of Shani Parnell, last known address Dodge City, South District, Prairie Avenue, number 27. Winslow sat up in bed, shaking off the last traces of sleep. He knew the area. It was a poor neighborhood, mostly home to meatpacking plant workers and auto mechanics. "Anything on the attacker?" The local police questioned the motel manager. He said a couple checked into the room. They introduced themselves as newlyweds, Mr. and Mrs. Geyser. The husband left the motel during the night. The car is a 2005 Chevrolet Impala, black, Kansas license plates. Did they say why we're involved? The body was discovered this morning when the maid came to clean the room. The time of death is estimated to be around 8 a.m. They found a wedding photo among the deceased's belongings with the inscription Dodge City, May 10th, and her registration is also from here. The Wichita police chief has requested assistance. Winslow glanced at the calendar. Today was May 13th, only 3 days after the wedding, a honeymoon that ended in blood. "Tell Captain Morris I'm heading to Wichita. Get all the paperwork ready for interagency cooperation." "Will do, Detective." Winslow hung up and threw the phone onto the crumpled sheets. At 45, he had seen it all, but the murder of newlyweds on their honeymoon was something new, even for him. An hour later, he was speeding down the highway in his patrol car. The morning road was practically empty, and Winslow allowed himself to exceed the speed limit. Every minute counts when it comes to solving a murder in the heat of the moment. Possibilities ran through his head. A domestic dispute that turned violent? A robbery? Or something more complicated? The Sleepy Moon Motel was a typical roadside motel, a single-story L-shaped building with a dozen doors opening onto the parking lot. A cracked neon sign promised air conditioning and cable TV. When Winslow pulled up, 2 Wichita police cars and a crime scene van were already at the entrance. The detective got out of the car, showed his badge to the officer on duty, and headed for number 8, where people in uniform were bustling about. "Detective Shaman Winslow, Dodge City Police." He introduced himself to a tall, graying man who, judging by his demeanor, was in charge. "Lieutenant Baxter, Wichita. Glad you got here so quickly." The police officer shook his hand. "The victim is yours, and it looks like the suspect is from there too. We've preserved the crime scene as it was found." Winslow pulled on the latex gloves and shoe covers he was offered and entered the room. The smell was the first thing that hit his nose, the metallic scent of blood mixed with the heavy stench of death. Shani Parnell lay on the bed, or rather what was left of her. The white sheets were a brown mess of dried blood. "Multiple stab wounds, probably more than 20, commented the medical examiner who was examining the body. "Most of them in the chest and abdomen. Clear signs of rage." This was not a cold-blooded murder, but a flash of uncontrolled aggression. Winslow nodded as he surveyed the room. Clothes were scattered everywhere. A chair was overturned, and the mirror in the bathroom was broken. The struggle had been violent. The murder weapon? Nothing found. Presumably a knife with a blade about 6 inches long. The detective slowly walked around the room, studying the details. On the bedside table was a framed photograph of a happy couple in front of a small church. A woman with a warm smile and a man embracing her shoulders as if she were his most precious treasure. "This is our victim and presumably her husband," said Baxter. "Laquan Geyser, according to the registration book." Winslow took the photograph and studied the faces closely. Shani was a beautiful woman with delicate features and expressive eyes. Laquan looked like a typical working-class guy. Broad shoulders, thick neck, confident smile. "Has the motel manager given a statement?" "Yes, he's waiting in the office. He says he didn't notice anything suspicious. The couple checked in yesterday around 6 o'clock. They seemed happy, laughing a lot. They paid cash for one night." On the dresser, Winslow noticed an open woman's purse. Next to it was a passport and a driver's license. He carefully picked up the documents and opened the passport. Shani Parnell, 27 years old, issued 2 years ago. The paper seemed too new for a document that was 2 years old. Next to the passport was a map of the United States with a route marked on it. A red line started in Dodge City, passed through Wichita, then turned south toward Oklahoma and Texas, ending in New Orleans. "Looks like they were planning a honeymoon trip across the country," Winslow commented. Wichita was just the first stop. He continued to examine the deceased's personal belongings. In the side pocket of her purse, he found a small plastic box with pills. There was no label, only the dosages written in marker. Winslow made a mental note to find out what the medication was. In another compartment, he found a small notebook. Leafing through it, the detective came across a list of phone numbers. One was labeled Tamika and circled with a heart, perhaps a close friend. "Found anything interesting in the husband's belongings?" Winslow asked the forensic technician who was going through the contents of the sports bag. "The usual travel items, clothes, toiletries, chargers. The only thing is, there's no knife, although there's a sheath of the right size in the side pocket. Maybe that's the murder weapon." Winslow nodded and headed for the exit. "I want to talk to the manager." The motel office was as shabby as the rest of the building. Behind the desk sat a thin man in his 60s with thinning gray hair and deep wrinkles on his face. "Mr. Jenkins?" Winslow addressed him. "Detective Shaman Winslow from Dodge City. Please tell me everything you remember about the couple in room 8. The manager rubbed his hands nervously. "They arrived yesterday around 6 in the evening. They seemed normal, happy even. They said they were on their honeymoon, traveling around the country." "How did they behave? Did you notice anything unusual?" "No, nothing out of the ordinary, just a normal couple. The husband held his wife's hand or put his arm around her waist the whole time. She seemed happy too, laughing at his jokes. And during the night? Did you hear anything?" Jenkins shook his head. "My office is at the other end of the building. After 11, I usually turn on the TV and fall asleep in my chair. I didn't hear anything until morning when the maid came and started screaming." "Did you see the husband leave?" "No. He must have left late at night. His car was gone from the parking lot in the morning." "Do you have any surveillance cameras?" The manager smiled. "Detective, this is a $50 a night roadside motel, not the Hilton. We don't have cameras." Winslow nodded and wrote down the statement. Before leaving, he asked, "When the couple checked in, did you check their ID?" "Of course, the woman's passport and the man's driver's license." "Did you notice anything unusual about those documents?" Jenkins thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, the woman's passport looked very new. I thought maybe she had just gotten it or replaced it." Winslow thanked the clerk and returned to the crime scene. He carefully examined the room again, trying to piece together the events of the previous night. A married couple checks into a motel. Everything looks normal. Then something happens. Perhaps the husband finds pills or some documents. An argument ensues, escalating into a violent attack. Multiple stab wounds indicate extreme rage. After the murder, Laquan Geyser leaves the motel and flees in an unknown direction. "Lieutenant Baxter, I need to contact our office in Dodge City. I want them to check the victim's registered address and start looking for Laquan Geyser." "Of course, use our equipment." At the Wichita police station, Winslow contacted Captain Morris. "I need information on 2 addresses, Prairie Avenue, 27, where the victim was registered, and the address where Laquan Geyser lives. Also run a background check on him. He may have a criminal record or outstanding warrants." "Will do. How soon do you plan to be back?" "As soon as the crime scene investigators are done. I should be back in 3 to 4 hours." While the experts were finishing their work, Winslow looked through the victim's personal belongings again. In one of the inner pockets of the purse, he found a rolled-up piece of paper. Unrolling it, the detective saw a prescription for Sean Parnell from a clinic in Kansas City, written 5 years ago. The prescription was for hormone medication. Sean Parnell. Winslow looked at the victim's body, then back at the prescription. Suddenly, the puzzle began to come together. A new passport, hormone medication, and the name Sean, too similar to Chanel. Winslow's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Detective, this is Morris. We have information on your request. Chanel Parnell did indeed live at the address you provided for the last 3 years. She worked as a stylist at Divina Beauty Salon on Main Street. As for Laquan Geyser, He's a mechanic at Fast Wheels Auto Repair on Industrial Highway. He lives at 15 Oak Street. He has several arrests for bar fights and one assault charge, but the case was dismissed after the parties reached a settlement. Good. Send patrol cars to both addresses. Have them check if Geyser is back and gather information from the neighbors. Already done. And one more thing, Detective. We checked the marriage records. Laquan and Chenille were indeed married on May 10th at St. Michael's Church. Thanks, Captain. I'll be back in a few hours. After ending the call, Winslow returned to the medical examiner, who was preparing to transport the body. Doctor, I have an unusual question for you. Could you determine if the victim had undergone gender reassignment surgery? The expert looked at the detective with surprise, then shifted his gaze to the body. I didn't notice during my initial examination, but now that you mention it, yes, there are signs of surgical intervention characteristic of transgender transition, but a full examination is needed for an accurate conclusion. Winslow thanked the doctor and stepped out of the room into the fresh air. The picture was beginning to emerge, and it wasn't pretty. Perhaps Laquan Geyser didn't know about his wife's past before the wedding, and when he found out, he reacted with extreme cruelty. The detective glanced again at the map with the route marked. They had left Dodge City 3 days ago, right after the wedding. Wichita was their first stop on their planned trip across America, a trip that ended in tragedy for Shawnee in a cheap roadside motel. Winslow got into his car and headed back to Dodge City. He had to get to the bottom of this story and find the killer, who was probably already crossing the state line, trying to escape justice. As he entered Dodge City in the early evening, Detective Shaman Winslow felt the fatigue of the long drive mingle with professional excitement. Shawnee Parnell's body remained at the Wichita morgue for a more detailed examination, but all the evidence and preliminary conclusions formed the basis of the case, which was now entirely under his command. Winslow's first stop was the police station to report to Captain Morris on the results of his trip and discuss the next steps in the investigation. "What do we have on the addresses?" Winslow asked as he entered the chief's office. Captain Morris, a heavy-set man with a military bearing and perpetually tired eyes, handed the detective a folder of reports. The patrol officers checked both addresses. The victim's apartment on Prairie Avenue is empty, no sign of the suspect returning. Neighbors confirmed that they saw the couple leave 3 days ago in a black Impala. According to a neighbor, they looked happy as doves. And Geyser's house? Also empty. We've left surveillance, but to be honest, I don't think he's stupid enough to come back. Winslow nodded as he looked through the reports. What about the wanted notice? Information about Geyser and his car is already in the database. I contacted the Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas highway patrols. If he's traveling on the main highways, there's a chance we can intercept him. Good. Tomorrow morning, I'll start interviewing people who knew both of them. The beauty salon where Shawnee worked, Geyser's auto repair shop, neighbors. Any theories about a motive? Morris asked, leaning back in his chair. Winslow paused for a moment, weighing whether to share his suspicions. There's something, but I want to check it out first. If I'm right, we're looking at a hate crime. The next morning, Winslow's first stop was the Divna Beauty Salon on Main Street. It was a small place with a bright pink sign and display windows through which several workstations and a waiting area were visible. Despite the early hour, the salon was already busy, with 2 women fussing over a client. A bell rang when Winslow opened the door. All 3 women turned their heads toward him at once. "Good morning, ladies," said the detective, showing his badge. "Detective Shaman Winslow, Dodge City Police Department. I need to talk to you about Shawnee Parnell." There was a heavy pause. Then one of the women, the older one with dyed red hair, stepped forward. "I'm Gloria, the owner of the salon. What happened to Chenille? She left on her honeymoon and was supposed to be back in 2 weeks." Winslow sighed. This part of the job was always the hardest. "I'm afraid I have some bad news. Chenille was found dead yesterday morning in a motel in Wichita." A deathly silence fell over the salon, broken only by the quiet hum of the air conditioner. "My God," Gloria finally managed to say, clutching her heart. "What happened?" "We're investigating a murder. I need to ask you a few questions about Chenille and her husband." The client quickly paid and left, leaving the detective with 2 salon employees. "How long did Chenille work here?" Winslow asked, taking out his notebook. 3 years, Gloria replied, still pale from shock. She came here when she first moved to Dodge City. She was an excellent stylist and the clients loved her. What do you know about her past?" Gloria and the second woman, who introduced herself as Jasmine, exchanged quick glances. "Not much," Gloria said cautiously. "She was pretty secretive. I know she used to live in Kansas City, but she never gave any details." "What about her husband, Laquan Geyser? How long had they known each other?" "About a year," Jasmine replied. "He used to come here to get his hair cut, and that's how they met. Then he started picking her up after work and giving her flowers." "What were they like together?" "On the surface, they seemed perfect," Gloria said. "Laquan seemed smitten with her, but, Winslow prodded her. "He had a reputation for being, how should I put it, a hothead. Once, when Chanel was late because of a client, he made a scene right here. He yelled that she must be cheating on him with other men." "Yes," Jasmine agreed. "And he was obsessed with how others viewed his relationship. He was always talking about real men and real women, like he was trying to prove something." Winslow made a note in his notebook. "Did Chanel have any close friends?" "Tamika," Gloria replied immediately. "Tamika Diggs. They were very close. Tamika works as a nurse at the city hospital. Does she know anything about Shani's past?" Again, there was a quick exchange of glances between the women. "Maybe," Gloria replied evasively. "They've been friends since Shani moved to town." Winslow decided to approach the question from a different angle. "Did Shani have any health problems? Was she taking any medication?" Both women visibly tensed. "I think you'd better talk to Tamika," Gloria said. "We really don't know any details." Winslow thanked them for their help and asked them to let him know if they remembered anything else. As he was leaving the salon, Jasmine caught up with him. "Detective," she began uncertainly. "I don't know if this is important, but about a month ago, Chanel told me she was very afraid of how Laquan would react if he found out a secret she had. She didn't say what it was, but she was very scared." "Thank you. That could be important," Winslow nodded. The next stop was the city hospital. Tamika Diggs was a short, energetic woman with short hair and attentive eyes. When Winslow showed his badge and said he wanted to talk about Shani, her face instantly froze. "What's wrong with her?" Tamika asked sharply. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but Chanel was killed in a motel in Wichita." Tamika turned pale and grabbed the wall to keep from falling. "He did it, didn't he? That bastard Laquan?" "We're investigating the case," Winslow replied cautiously. "Can we talk in a more private setting?" They moved to an empty staff lounge. Tamika sat down, clenching her hands so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "I knew something would happen," she said quietly. "I warned her not to marry him. I told her he'd lose it if he found out." "Found out what, Miss Diggs?" Tamika looked up at the detective. "You already know, don't you? Did you find her pills or medical records?" Winslow nodded. "I saw a prescription for Sean Parnell." Tamika sighed deeply. "Chanel. Used to be Sean. She had gender reassignment surgery 5 years ago in Kansas City. Then she moved here to start a new life." "And Laquan didn't know?" "No, Chanel was afraid to tell him. He was so traditional, always talking about how real men and women should be. How much he hated," she faltered, "people who didn't fit his mold. Why did she marry him?" "She loved him," Tamika replied simply, "and she hoped that someday he would love her enough to accept the truth. It was foolish, I know. I told her it was dangerous. Do you have any documents confirming the surgery?" Tamika paused, as if making a decision. "I have copies of some medical reports at home. Chanel asked me to keep them just in case. I can give them to you." "That would be very helpful for the investigation. What about her family?" "They turned their backs on her when she decided to have the surgery. They haven't been in touch for many years." After talking to Tamika, Winslow drove to the address where the newlyweds had lived, a small apartment on Prairie Avenue. A neighbor, an elderly woman with curious eyes, was eager to talk about the couple. They were nice kids, especially the girl, Chanel. She always said hello and asked if we needed any help. And Laquan, she grimaced. He was too loud. Sometimes I heard them arguing. What were the arguments about? The usual things, money, household chores. But once I heard him shouting something about secrets and lies. That was about a week before the wedding. Winslow wrote down her statement and headed to his last stop for the day, the Quick Wheels Auto Repair Shop on Industrial Highway. The shop was a typical garage, dirty floor, the smell of oil and fuel, tools scattered everywhere. Several mechanics were working on cars. Winslow approached the man who looked older than the rest. "I'm looking for information on Laquan Geyser," the detective said, showing his badge. The man wiped his hands on a rag and gave Winslow a once-over. "Marcus Thompson, owner. Laquan hasn't been here since last Friday. He took 2 weeks off for his honeymoon. What can you tell me about him?" "He's a good mechanic. He works hard. He's polite to customers as long as they don't try to tell him how to do his job." "What about his temper? Is he quick to anger?" Marcus grunted. "Sometimes, especially if you hurt his pride." Once a customer questioned his professionalism, and Laquan almost got into a fight. How was he with his wife? He loved her, or so it seemed. He was always showing pictures of her, talking about how beautiful she was and how lucky he was. One of the mechanics, a young guy, stopped working and listened to the conversation. "Hey, Ray," Marcus called him. "You were closest to Laquan. Come here." The guy came over, wiping his hands. "Raymond Johnson," he introduced himself. "Laquan and I often hung out together after work. Tell us about his relationship with Chenille." Raymond shrugged. He was obsessed with her, in a good way and a bad way. He was always checking her phone, jealous of every guy she talked to. But at the same time, he was proud to have such a beautiful girlfriend. He said it proved he was a real man. "Did he ever get violent? Toward Chenille?" Raymond thought for a moment. "Not in front of me." But Laquan was very concerned about his reputation. He wanted everyone to see that he had it all. A beautiful woman, a good job, a cool car. Was he obsessed with being a real man? Yes, he talked about it all the time. Once we were watching a game at a bar and he started ranting about how men today have become too soft, that we need to defend traditional values and all that. How did he feel about transgender people? Raymond and Marcus exchanged glances. "He hated them," Raymond said bluntly. "Once there was a story on TV about trans activists, and he almost smashed the TV. He said some terrible things." Winslow nodded, making a mental note. The picture was becoming clearer. "One more question. Was Laquan friends with a guy named Darius?" "Darius Trezor," Raymond replied immediately. "Yes, he's his best friend. They've been friends since childhood. Darius works as a security guard at the Midnight Club on River Street." "Were they close?" "Like brothers. Darius always covered for Laquan when he got into trouble. If anyone knows where he is now, it's Darius." After thanking the mechanics, Winslow returned to the police station. He asked them to check Laquan's phone calls for the last 24 hours. An hour later, a report of the phone calls landed on Winslow's desk. After the estimated time of the murder, Laquan had called only one person, Darius Trezor. 3 calls, the first at 2:15 a.m., immediately after the murder, then at 3:40 a.m., and the last at 5:20 a.m. "We need to find this Darius," Winslow told Captain Morris. "There's a chance he's helping Laquan hide." "I'll send some people to the Midnight Club," Morris replied. "Have you gathered enough information about the motive?" Winslow nodded and recounted his findings: the hormone pills, the documents in Sean Parnell's name, Tamika's testimony, and the statements from Laquan's co-workers. It appears that Chenille was a transgender woman and was hiding it from her husband. Laquan was obsessed with the image of a real man and openly expressed hatred toward transgender people. If he found her pills or documents during the trip, a hate crime, Morris concluded, then the feds will want to get involved. "First, we need to find Darius and track down Laquan," Winslow replied, "and get final confirmation from the medical examiner in Wichita." Winslow checked his phone. A message had come in from the officer who had obtained Shani's medical records from Tamika. The operation had indeed been performed 5 years ago at a clinic in Kansas City. Shani had been taking hormone medication regularly and was being monitored by an endocrinologist. Another message came from the crime scene investigators. An analysis of the calls between Laquan and Darius showed that they had spoken for a total of about 30 minutes. The last call was made from an area near the Oklahoma border. It looked like Laquan was heading south, possibly trying to reach Mexico. Winslow checked Darius Trezor's address and decided to pay him a visit that evening. If he was lucky, he might be able to track down the killer before he left the country. Darius Trezor's address led Detective Shamond Winslow to a dilapidated apartment building on the outskirts of Dodge City. The evening twilight cast a dull purple hue on the gray walls of the building as Winslow climbed the creaky stairs to the third floor. 2 patrol officers followed him in case Darius resisted or tried to escape. Apartment 38 was at the end of a long corridor with peeling paint. Winslow pressed his ear against the door. The muffled sound of a television could be heard inside. He exchanged glances with the officers, then knocked firmly. "Darius Trezor! Dodge City Police! Open the door!" There was silence behind the door, and the TV turned off. Then heavy footsteps could be heard. "Who's there?" came a low, wary voice. "Detective Shamond Winslow. I need to ask you some questions about Laquan Geyser." There was a long pause. Winslow nodded to the officers, preparing for a possible chase, but after a few seconds, the door slowly opened. Standing in the doorway was a large man with broad shoulders, short-cropped hair, and a wary expression. "I don't know anything about Laquan," Darius said immediately, crossing his powerful arms over his chest. "Do you mind if we come in?" Winslow took a step forward, leaving Darius no choice. The apartment was surprisingly neat. Minimal furniture, no clutter. A phone lay on the coffee table, next to an open bottle of whiskey. "Hard day?" Winslow nodded at the bottle, sitting down on the sofa without invitation. Darius shrugged, remaining standing. "Night shift at the club. Just relaxing." "When was the last time you saw or spoke to Laquan Geyser?" "I don't remember exactly. Maybe a week ago? He's on his honeymoon." Winslow stared at Darius, not taking his eyes off him. Darius held his ground, not blinking, but a barely noticeable bead of sweat on his temple betrayed his nervousness. "Interesting," the detective said. "Your phone records tell a different story. You spoke to him 3 times the night before last. The first call was at 2:15 a.m., right after his wife was killed." Darius tensed noticeably but kept his face impassive. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The murder of Shani Parnell at the Sleepy Moon Motel in Wichita," Winslow said harshly. "Laquan stabbed his wife to death and ran away. Then he called you." 30 minutes of conversation, Darius. What were you talking about in the middle of the night? "I don't know anything about that," Darius repeated, but his voice trembled slightly. Winslow stood up and walked over to the window, where several framed photographs lay on the windowsill. In one of them, Darius and Laquan, very young, were standing arm in arm, smiling broadly at the camera. "You've been friends since childhood, right?" the detective asked, picking up the photo. "Like brothers. Raymond from the auto shop said so. Darius always covered for Laquan when he got into trouble." "Ray talks too much," Darius muttered. "Listen," Winslow turned to him. "I understand you're protecting your friend, but this is a serious crime. Accessory after the fact, harboring a criminal, obstructing justice. You could get up to 5 years in prison." Darius remained stubbornly silent, but Winslow could see his brain working, calculating the options. "Let's check your car," the detective said suddenly. "I wonder if we'll find any bloodstains. Maybe you helped Laquan get rid of the murder weapon." "You need a warrant," Darius barked. "Already on it," Winslow replied calmly, although it was a bluff. "It'll be here in 20 minutes. By the way, we checked your finances. $2,000 in cash withdrawn yesterday morning. Quite a large sum, don't you think?" Darius's face turned pale. The detective realized he had hit the nail on the head. "It's my money. I can do what I want with it." "Of course," Winslow nodded. "Only a judge might disagree when that money is going to help a fugitive murderer." Darius sank heavily onto the sofa, his broad shoulders slumping. "What do you want?" "The truth. Where's Laquan?" "I don't know exactly," Darius replied, not looking at the detective. "He just called me that night. He was panicking. He said he had to disappear, that his life was over." "Did he confess to the murder?" Darius paused, then nodded slowly. "Not in those words. He said that everything had gone wrong, that he had discovered something terrible about Shani and got angry. And you helped him with money." It was not a question. "He's been my friend since childhood," Darius said quietly. "We grew up together. We dealt with all the shit that came our way. I couldn't say no." Winslow pulled up a chair and sat down across from Darius, looking him straight in the eye. "I understand friendship, I really do. But Laquan killed an innocent man, Darius. And he didn't just kill him, he stabbed him in a fit of rage, inflicting more than 20 knife wounds." Darius shuddered and lowered his head even further. "What did he find out about Shani?" Winslow asked. "Why was he so angry?" "He didn't say specifically," Darius replied after a pause. "He just kept saying that she had deceived him, that it was all a lie, that she wasn't who she said she was." "And where was he headed?" Darius looked up, his eyes betraying his inner struggle. Winslow understood that this was the moment when he would decide whether to turn in his friend or not. "Listen," the detective said gently, "Laquan is wanted for a serious crime. If he crosses the border, he may never return, but he still won't be able to escape what he's done. It will haunt him for the rest of his life." "He was going to Mexico," Darius finally said, "through Laredo. He has a friend there who can help him cross the border. When was the last time you spoke to him?" "This afternoon. He called from a payphone. He said he'd be at the border tomorrow morning." Winslow nodded and took out his phone. "I need the name and contact information for this friend in Laredo." Darius hesitated for a few seconds, then gave in. He gave the name, Ernesto Vasquez, owner of an auto repair shop in Laredo who sometimes moonlighted as a smuggler. "You made the right choice," Winslow said when he finished his call with Captain Morris. "He's still my friend," Darius replied quietly, "and I don't know how I'm going to live with this." Leaving Darius's apartment, Winslow immediately contacted the Texas police. Information about the black Chevrolet Impala and its owner was relayed to all patrols on the roads leading to Laredo. Special attention was paid to roadside motels and gas stations where the fugitive might stop. Leaving the building, Winslow stopped on the sidewalk. The fresh air helped clear his head. The case was coming together, but he couldn't afford to relax. Laquan was a cornered animal, and those were especially dangerous. The detective returned to the station to coordinate the search operation. Captain Morris gave him a separate room, where Winslow hung maps of the southern states, marking possible escape routes for Laquan. "News from Texas," Morris said as he entered the room around midnight. "A black Impala was spotted at a gas station 50 miles from Laredo. The driver matches Geyser's description." "Did they take him?" Winslow jumped up. "No, he left before the patrol arrived. But the cameras caught the license plate. It's definitely his car." Winslow nodded, the fatigue from a sleepless night instantly vanishing. "I'm flying to Texas on the first flight." By morning, the detective was already at Laredo Police Headquarters, coordinating the search operation with local forces. Ernesto Vasquez's auto repair shop was under surveillance, but Laquan had not yet appeared. "He's somewhere nearby," Winslow told his Texas colleagues. "Maybe he's waiting or changing plans. We need to check all the motels in the area." By noon, a tip came in that a black Impala had been spotted in the parking lot of the Canyon Motel, 15 miles from Laredo. Winslow and 4 local officers immediately drove to the scene. The motel was a dilapidated one-story building with a half-empty parking lot, and there, in the far corner it was, a black Chevrolet Impala with Kansas license plates. "Surround the building," Winslow ordered. "Be careful, the suspect is armed and dangerous." They split up. 2 officers went to the back entrance, and 2 more covered the side exits. Winslow headed for the motel office. "Which room is the owner of the black Impala staying in?" he asked the sleepy clerk, showing his badge. "Room 7, he replied, his eyes wide open. "Paid cash for 1 night." Winslow radioed the number to the officers and slowly moved along the building, keeping his hand on his holster. Room 7 was in the middle of the building, the curtains tightly drawn. The detective took up a position to the side of the door, one of the Texas officers standing on the other side. The radio confirmed that all exits were blocked. "Laredo Police!" the officer announced loudly. "Laquan Geyser! Come out with your hands up!" There was movement inside the room, followed by the sound of breaking glass. "He's trying to escape through the window!" Winslow shouted into the radio. Without waiting for a response, the detective ran along the side of the building. Sure enough, the side window of room 7 was broken, and a man was climbing out. "Stop! Police!" Winslow shouted, drawing his gun. Laquan Geyser turned, saw the weapon pointed at him, and started to run. Winslow rushed after him, jumping over bushes and trash cans. The fugitive was fast, but the detective was close behind. They ran across the parking lot to a vacant lot behind the motel. "Stop, Laquan, you have nowhere to run," Winslow shouted, closing the distance. Suddenly, Laquan stopped and spun around. The knife he had used to kill Shawnee flashed in his hand. "Don't come any closer," he shouted, breathing heavily. "I swear I'll use it." Winslow stopped a few meters away, keeping his gun pointed at Laquan. "Put the knife down, Laquan. It's over. There's nowhere to run." "I'm not going back to prison!" Laquan's eyes flashed feverishly. "I was defending my honor. She betrayed me." "Put the knife down," Winslow repeated in a calm but firm voice. "You'll have a chance to explain everything. The court will take the circumstances into account." Laquan hesitated, his hand holding the knife trembling. He was a cornered animal, and Winslow knew that moments like these were the most dangerous. "Think about it," the detective continued. "If you attack a police officer, you'll be shot. Is it worth it?" At that moment, 2 officers appeared from around the corner of the motel with their guns drawn. Laquan realized he was completely surrounded. He stood there for a second, as if preparing to lunge, then his shoulders slumped. The knife fell from his open fingers. "Just do it," he whispered, dropping to his knees and putting his hands behind his head. Winslow quickly approached, handcuffed him, and only then breathed a sigh of relief. The hunted animal had been caught. At the Laredo police station, Laquan was locked in an interrogation room. Winslow watched him through the one-way mirror. The man sat staring into space, his face expressionless except for exhaustion. "He agreed to talk without a lawyer," said the Texas detective. "Looks like he wants to talk." Winslow nodded and entered the room. Laquan didn't even look up. "I'm Detective Shaman Winslow of the Dodge City Police Department," he said, sitting down across from him. "Do you understand why you're here?" "Because I killed my wife," Laquan replied hollowly. "Tell me what happened that night at the Sleepy Moon Motel." Laquan looked up. There was no remorse or fear in his eyes, only emptiness. "We checked in that evening. Everything was fine. Shawnee was happy, saying how glad she was to finally be traveling across the country. We were close. Then she went to take a shower, and I decided to look at the map and plan tomorrow's route." He paused, as if gathering his thoughts. "There was a map in her purse. I started looking for it and came across a box of pills. No label, just some pills. I thought maybe they were birth control or vitamins, but something bothered me. I kept looking and found her passport, driver's license, and an old prescription for Sean Parnell." Laquan clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "At first I didn't understand. I thought maybe they were her brother's documents or something. But then I saw the photo on the prescription. It was her, only with a man's haircut and different facial features. And then I understood everything." "What did you do?" "When she got out of the shower, I asked her. I showed her the prescription, the pills. At first she tried to deny everything, but then..." Laquan took a deep breath. "Then she confessed. She said she wanted to tell me after the wedding, when I loved her enough to accept the truth." Laquan laughed bitterly. "Can you imagine? All this time I was sleeping with a man. I married a man. I became a laughingstock without even knowing it." "And you killed her," Winslow said quietly. "I was furious." Laquan's eyes filled with tears. "I don't remember much. She begged me to listen, said she loved me. But all I saw was deception. All those months, it was a lie. My life, my reputation, everything is ruined." Laquan looked around the room, as if only now realizing where he was. "And this is how it ended. I lost everything. My job, my freedom, my future, because of her lies." "Chanel didn't deserve to die," Winslow said. "Whatever you think about her choices, about how she lived her life, she was someone who loved you." "Loved?" Laquan grimaced. "Love isn't built on lies. She lied to me about the most important thing. She used me." Winslow could see that further conversation was pointless. Laquan was too deeply entrenched in his own righteousness, in his own idea of justice. "You're being transferred to Kansas for trial," the detective said, standing up. There you'll be charged with first-degree murder, possibly with the aggravating circumstance of a hate crime. And how long will I get? Laquan asked without much interest. Life, Winslow replied honestly. Texas is a state with the death penalty, but since the crime was committed in Kansas, what difference does it make? Laquan shrugged. My life is already over. As Winslow was leaving the room, Laquan suddenly called after him, Detective, could you forgive someone like that, if you were in my place? Winslow paused in the doorway, considering his answer. I don't know, but I know for sure that I wouldn't kill a man for trying to be himself. 3 days later, Laquan Geyser was extradited to Kansas and placed in a Wichita prison awaiting trial. Winslow was present at the transfer and then looked in on him in his cell. Laquan sat on a hard cot, staring into the void in front of him. He barely reacted to the world around him, mechanically following the guard's orders. I have a question for you, Laquan, Winslow said, standing at the bars. Did you think about running back to Mexico, starting a new life under a different name? In essence, become a different person, not the person you were born to be. Isn't that what Shawnee did? Laquan slowly turned his head, something like surprise flashing in his eyes. That's different, he said quietly. Completely different. Why? Winslow pressed. Because, Laquan faltered, unable to find the words. Just because. Winslow nodded. He hadn't expected insight or remorse. Laquan Geyser was a product of his environment, of his prejudices, and those prejudices had cost the life of a young woman whose only crime was wanting to be herself. See you in court, Laquan, the detective said, turning to leave. I don't regret it, Laquan suddenly said to his back. I was defending my honor, and I'd do it again. Winslow stopped but didn't turn around. He wasn't going to hear anything new.